This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast, Week 6 NFL Picks. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and I'm joined, as always, by the Score's lead betting analyst, Mr. Matt Russell. I gotta say, I gotta keep the wave high. The wave is still going. Battled, scrapped my way last week to a 7-6-1 record in Week 5. I'll take that. I'll take it. It's not pretty, but we take it. You have those weeks. Overall, the record sits 46-30-2 on the season. And I got to ask you, Mr. Matt Russell, how are you feeling as we're now at Week 6 of the NFL season? How are you, my friend?
I'm good, buddy. There's big waves, there's small waves. Sometimes there are no waves at all. So even a small wave is still a good enough wave, especially based on, what you've banked so far this season. So nicely done so far. We are sort of into, I guess, the second quarter of the season. Obviously some weird mathematics when it comes to a 17-game season, but it's neither here nor there, right? It's time to really go when it comes to the NFL. Now that we're pretty deep into October, so let's do it, man. I'm fired up.
Let's get things going for sure. And of course, a reminder to like and follow the pod wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you share, you follow, you rate us, all that fun stuff. Tell your friends. If you need picks on the weekend, just tune in. Find the link, scroll ahead, hear the conversation, hear about where the line was, all that fun stuff. Tune in. We got you covered. For the people that might be new to the pod, because, it's Week 6, you might be brand new. You might have just stumbled upon it. First off, where you been? Because it's Week 6. Secondly, going to explain what we do here. I will make a pick for each and every game. I'll tell you which side I'm leaning on. I'll give a brief explanation why. Sometimes it'll make sense. Sometimes it won't. But most importantly, my guy Matt comes in with the information and education on where the line is, where it was, and where it could be going heading into kickoff. And the whole purpose of this conversation is so that we come out on the other side with hopefully a much more informed pick. And that is the key. I try to play the role of the viewer, ask the questions that are needed to help us all win some money. We've been doing well so far. We just hope to keep the good times rolling as we head into Week 6. I can't believe I'm saying that, but we start, as always, with Thursday Night Football. Short week here. Broncos at the Chiefs. Chiefs laying 10.5 points at home to said Denver Broncos. And I hate this so much. You know that I want to lay the 10.5 points, or I am laying the 10.5 points with the Chiefs here. This reeks to me, though, of the game where the Chiefs are like, it's Thursday night, it's the Broncos. We're like bringing out our C-level plays for this game and just getting through this game. The Broncos will be getting blown out. Russ comes back with the backdoor cover. I'm going to be cursing because they suck. Or maybe this is a day that Sean Payton finally turns on Russell Wilson and he's done for the year.
Right.
But either way, I talk about trying to watch the game and trying to think about which side I would like to be on while the game is coming down in the balance. And if anyone who's listened to this pod knows that I like sitting there relying on Patrick Mahomes to try to score me a touchdown. I'm betting here and laying the 10.5 points on the Chiefs' ability to get touchdowns and the Broncos' ability to just kick field goals and do the Broncos type things that make you lose to the Jets. I'm feeling that you're going to try to talk me out of this, and I understand that. And this is why I'm here, for the guidance and the education and the hopes here. But I'm laying the 10.5 points with the Chiefs.
I'm not going to talk you out of it.
Whoa!
Big surprise off the start here. This Broncos team's terrible, man. I made the joke on Twitter on Sunday. Like, if they can't win with those orange uniforms on against the Jets, like, they've got bigger issues than we ever thought imaginable. Regardless of what uniforms they were wearing, they really do have bigger issues than we ever thought imaginable. I was just looking at it today as I'm writing my Thursday Night Football column. They literally have given up like 125 is the quarterback rating for the opponents.
Wow.
On average this season of the Denver Broncos. Now, you can quickly go through some of those opponents if you want. You can start with Zach Wilson last week. You can go to such guys as Sam Howell, right? Little Justin Fields, not necessarily known for his throwing prowess. I think he was averaging about 25 from a quarterback rating standpoint before he faced the Broncos. And it's like going against the Broncos makes you like kick into high gear where you're like, man, I am good at this. And then he rolls that into the game last week against Washington.
I think a couple weeks ago, I even said that the Broncos defense made Justin Fields look like Mahomes, and now they're playing Mahomes.
Yeah. And so honestly, the strange part about this is that Kansas City's offense hasn't been particularly great this year. Not that, not to the level that we've become accustomed. And like, here's the great news. You get the Broncos now, right? And so I think they're going to be able to score at will against the Broncos. And then I have something of a theory when it comes to, as you mentioned, Russell Wilson. You kind of hit the head on it, right? It's like they're not going to make a quarterback change. And if you watch that game against the Jets, right, like Sean Payton has had enough of this dude. Like he is way out on Russell Wilson. And that last interception that was obviously returned for the touchdown that sealed the game. Like he's just so out on this guy, but he's not going to make a change on a short week to Jarrett Stidham. He's not going to put Stidham in that position. What he might do is put him in a position on a sort of what do they call it? A mini bye week, right? Where you throw Wilson out here to get slaughtered by the Chiefs, and then you just pull a, Mike Singletary can't win with him type situation. And then you go, okay, I'm just going Jarrett Stidham the rest of the way. A little deja vu for Stidham taking over for a veteran quarterback after the Derek Carr fiasco from last year. And then you go either Jarrett Stidham's good, just like a solid maybe and probably not, or he's not, and the Broncos go full tank mode because, this is kind of where we're at with the Broncos with one win. There are these, the interesting things sort of shaping up this season. And I wrote about this a little bit in my Survivor column this week, is you've got the 5 kind of worst teams from before the season started, right? The teams that had like really low win totals, right? Cardinals, Texans, Rams, Buccaneers, Colts. All those teams are like pretty okay. Mm-hmm. And then it's the next there's a next little tier there where everybody kind of thought teams are going to be around, 8.5 win. Your Patriots, your Broncos, now your Vikings with Justin Jefferson out. Those teams are the ones who are sitting here after, potentially after week 6 being like, oh man, we're 1-5, but there's a handful of really good quarterbacks coming up in the draft, right? And like the Patriots could definitely use one. The Broncos could definitely use one, especially on a rookie deal, right? And then they can kind of do, I don't know how you get out of, at least any kind of percentage of the Russell Wilson contract at this point. But obviously from a rookie deal perspective, like that doesn't cost that much relative to your cap. You'd suck it up at this point to just start fresh with somebody good. So, I kind of think he's just like leaving him out to slaughter here. And you mentioned like the idea of the Chiefs kind of just going through the motions here. Both games last year, the Broncos were equally bad, or they might actually been a little bit better last year. They were equally bad last year, and both games, they covered the big number in this, right? And so it's not like the Chiefs are like, oh, this is going to be easy, divisional game, that cliche type stuff, but also games that were competitive last year. So I think that sort of attitude, if you will, was probably pervasive for the Jets game because they had seen what Zach Wilson was up to. And they're like, it's a road game, Sunday night, bright lights. We're going to be able to take care of this guy. Same kind of deal here, where it's like, man, we played with our food a little bit against the Jets. We certainly, got a little too close for comfort against the Broncos in those 2 games last year. And as we talk about all the time, right, the Chiefs' infrastructure is sort of a set it and forget it type outfit, where it's like, it's not like we have adjustments to make or new plays to put in or like any sort of scramble, panic, survival mode. It's just like, yeah, we've got all the stuff. Let's just go and run the stuff. So honestly, even if Travis Kelce doesn't play in this game, or honestly, if he doesn't, and this line comes down underneath 10, like that, I haven't bet it yet. Yeah, because I haven't bet it yet because I'm like, well, what if Travis Kelce gets ruled out? And as we saw against the Lions, like A, that matters against good teams, but B, that matters against the point spread. And so while the number here I think is pretty fair, I have downgraded the Broncos below the market. So I'm actually like, I have Chiefs like -11 here as my sort of fair price. Mm-hmm. But like the line here is fair right now. And if we get an overreaction or a reaction to Travis Kelce being out, which again would matter against a good team, this is not a good team in the Denver Broncos here, right? And so I think this is that Chiefs blowout spot. And it's the type of Chiefs blowout spot where, and listen, we can get into that Vikings game. Like, I don't know that we need to. Like, they were very fortunate to cover the spread in that game. Like, that was ludicrous.
Yeah.
So I would make that Vikings bet like a billion times over again, which is like not a sentence
I sweated that one out. I definitely sweated that one out.
You're just dodging bullets like left, right, and center with that, right? And the idea of like field goals and not field goals and this, that, or whatever. But the point is like, this is the type of game where we're going to watch them win like 40-10. And it's going to be like, it's going to inflate point spreads on that extra half point or a point for, honestly, who knows, maybe another 2 years, right? Where you're going to be back to sort of being a valuable fade here on the Chiefs. That's just not what this is this week. I think they truck the Broncos pretty significantly here.
For sure. One thing I want to pay attention to in laying the points with the Chiefs is they got to start getting some of their new receivers going, right? The guy's not named Travis Kelce, right? Like, they need some help there if they are going to make a run deep into the playoffs. And I feel like that process has to start at some point, whether it's Rice or what's the other young kid's name? I'm drawing a blank right now.
We got Watson, we got Sky Moore, we got Kadarius Toney. But I'll interject. I think an interesting price here, Marcus Valdes-Scantling, and not a new guy by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
But he's plus 400 to score in this game. He doesn't have a touchdown yet this season.
You're saying a deep ball, one deep ball.
Yeah, I think he's like 9th in targets on the team, but he's actually first on the Chiefs in snaps. Okay. So he's out there, he's just running laps. He's doing laps, right? And if you're out there doing laps and the Chiefs can kind of get whatever they want against the Broncos defense, he's been the good soldier. Again, he's out there. And if you're out there with Patrick Mahomes, you have a pretty good chance to score. And if it was plus 200, plus 250, like all the other receivers are right now in that anytime touchdown market, I'd pass on it. But now that we've gotten to a point of plus 400, it's like, yeah, I'll take my shot on that.
And especially if there's no Kelce, right? Get in while it's hot for sure. We'll keep it moving though. There's a Sunday morning game. Kind of getting used to these Sunday morning London games. I don't know if I like or dislike them yet. I guess it kind of depends on what happens on Saturday night, if you know what I'm saying. But anyways, we got the Ravens at the Titans here. And last week, the Ravens lose to the Steelers. We were all over the Steelers, and I'm pretty sure you were on the money line with the Steelers as well. But Steelers beating the Ravens last week, that was a classic, just going to be a close game somehow, some way. If you're looking at it from the Ravens' point of view, like, how many passes can you possibly drop that are just like right in your hands? Totally. Either way, the game is what the game was. They lose to the Steelers, and now you're telling me I'm laying 4 points against the Titans. I'm going to be honest with you. I have Titans plus 4 here, and then I realize, oh, wait, this isn't a Titans home game. This is in London.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that's going to pause me for sure as we discuss that angle of this game. But from the Tennessee side, they lost last week in Indy, and that was a weird game as well. Very weird game, as I feel like when you play Indy and then Richardson gets hurt in the middle of the game and then Minshew comes in and it's a completely different offense and a completely different team, that's kind of tough for a defense to adjust, another team to adjust. And, Titans find themselves as losers. What do you like going into this game? Because to me, the biggest factor as I'm trying to read this line is the fact that it's in London. What do you make from that being the point spread here of Ravens laying 4 points?
We'll get to this game in a second because I got a bit of a rant here for you, right? And I know you like sort of the idea that what's going on in the content space. And honestly, when people talk about the content space and betting and whatnot, and like good, bad, or whatever, like I honestly kind of am sick of it because it gets pretty tired. The one exception that I will make is arrogance, right? Because like the whole thing is we're going to win 55% of the time, we're going to lose 45% of the time, right? Like there's just no room for arrogance. And so the people who came on in different shows and tweets and this and that and said that you couldn't bet on the Steelers just on a trend last week, those people need to be launched in the sun. You are trying to be far too cool than you are when it comes to this, because one, any trend that had to do with the Ravens and the Steelers had to do with both of those coaches because they have been there for so long, right? Exactly. Yeah, all the trends about basically anything else are largely garbage. But when you have two coaches matching up, knowing each other the way that they do, you have to understand like that matters. That these guys there's nothing these guys are going to pull out of the bag of tricks that is going to fool the other, right? They know that this matchup is about honestly, who's tougher? And how many times do we have to see the Ravens to know that like this team isn't particularly tough when it comes to like tough get going type situation? They have all the talent in the world. Every season it feels like I go in and I go like, man, like this, this team could be sitting on a big season. And if they had beaten the Colts and they'd beaten the Steelers, 2 games that were right there for them, they would be in the middle of a big season right now. I believe they would be undefeated at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, but they just don't, right? And so like, that's the point, because the reason that the underdog always prevails, at least via the spread, in the Steelers and the Ravens, is because there is some reason, one way or another, whether it's like COVID issues or this, that, or whatever, for the market to really like one side or the other. Like that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Like every time, like the situation specifically might be different, but the situation in general is always the same. The market loves, for whatever reason, one side or the other with two franchises that are matched up so tightly together that like they really shouldn't ever be bigger than a 3-point spread. Now you're sitting there watching the game and you're going like, man, the Steelers offense is just dreadful. But like, we know that going in, right? Like, again, like that's why the number is what the number is. And so this idea that you just get on your high horse out there and are like, you're stupid if you're only basing something off of trends. Like, I get that. Like, that's fine if you want to make that as a blanket statement. I would agree with that statement sort of more than 50% of the time. But like, you have to parse it out and kind of know what you're talking about when you're sort of making these statements. So that's my rant on this. As to your question, Baltimore and Tennessee here. Yeah, like the neutral site element here kicks this thing obviously up a little bit for the Ravens. Mm-hmm. But I don't have it going as far as 4, right? My market rating is a flat 3. My personal rating in this is a little bit lower than that at sort of like 2.5. So conceptually, I like the Titans. The interesting element here, and I don't know if this is built into the, into the line here, or is it something of a bounce back element for Baltimore? Or again, this idea that like Baltimore's talent is always kind of going to be better than most of the teams that they play. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing here is Baltimore went straight to London after the game on Sunday. Oh. And if you believe what you saw last Sunday, where you had the Jaguars sitting there at home, quote unquote, at home, on the road against Buffalo in London.
They're like at their cottage, their second home.
They're at their cottage. Buffalo was supposed to be at a cottage that they bought, only they never bought it because that wasn't really a home game, even though they had a decent amount of fans there or whatever, but congratulations. They come out super, super sluggish, whereas Jacksonville honestly probably should have blown them out in the first half, but just kind of, I think Jacksonville's general, quasi ineptitude kind of kept Buffalo in that game. So if you believe that this jet lag thing matters, the Ravens have gone out of their way, because I think the last time they played in London, they got smoked, that John Harbaugh was like, hey, we need to prepare for this a little bit better. And like, getting to London earlier is going to be better for your body clock. Like, that's the most basic thing imaginable. And we've been doing these London games for how many years now? And like, teams are just starting to figure out that like it increases your win probability to go earlier. The earlier you go, the better chance you have to win. And so like, is that making me want to lay points with Baltimore when like, fundamentally, my general attitude towards the Tennessee Titans is take the points when you can get them, and that's with whether that's the Titans or the other team. So like, I'm probably still going to be on the Titans here, but it's not as like, I don't have the same conviction, because one, maybe that trip over, the Sunday trip over, has led the market, maybe not necessarily odds makers. I don't know that odds makers necessarily knew of this, but more like the market, which would normally be like gobbling up the Titans as an underdog, is sort of like, the smart money out there like knows what the Ravens have done as far as camping out in London here for almost a full week ahead of this game, and are like, ooh, we like that. And I understand why they like that. It's just, for me, I just still rather take the points, as you mentioned, with the Titans, Vrabel, and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's super interesting for me with that. And the one thing that stands out to me that you mentioned, as I'm plus the points with the Titans here, just a basic principle of take the points when you can get them, as you said, with the Titans. Fade them when they're favored, especially on the road, something like that. That kind of appears to be the trend so far. A lot of interesting games this week. I won't say big boy. I don't know how to phrase this, but I'm very intrigued by our next game here. Okay. The Niners laying 5.5 points in Cleveland against the Browns. I hate this game in the Vegas zone. The Niners balled out, obviously, against the Dallas Cowboys, a game that we were all over, by the way. If you listened to the pod last week, I hope you were sitting Scrooge McDucking on Sunday night, enjoying that blowout win by the Niners against the fraud Cowboys. Story for another day. But I feel like coming off of that massive game for the Niners, now you got to go to Cleveland. There's talk of wind and rain and just the mucky, gross Cleveland weather. They're coming off a bye week, which is perfect for the Browns. I'm assuming that Deshaun Watson should be back, which should matter-ish.
Oh, it definitely
even if
matters.
It doesn't. No, but I'm saying matters. No. But I'm saying like he should be back, but like at the same time, you still had a bye week to figure some stuff out that it hopefully won't look as atrocious as it did last week.
Sure.
Or sorry, the last time we saw them with whatever my guy's name. I was gonna call him DDT, but that's not his. That's not the.
I kind of prefer it, to be honest.
But bottom line here, this is just not a good spot for the Niners. I see this as I'm taking the points. The Browns. Home dogs, 5.5 points. I feel like the Niners win, but they're going to have to like gut this out. It's going to be like a 10-6, like just ugly smash mouth game. I don't like this game at all. What say you, my friend?
Yeah, so I mean, what the Browns figured out, and I don't want to besmirch the good name of DTR, because he was so much fun in college and so much fun to bet on, etc. But what they found out was like, listen, a rookie 5th-round pick, shockingly, is not ready to play, in the NFL, which is, I don't know if they regret the Josh Dobbs release, thinking that DTR could be the backup, because it took all of 4 or 5 games for Watson to get hurt, just when he was sort of starting to show some of his old promise, if you will. And so we might be looking at PJ Walker. Your boy.
Ooh, my boy, definitely my boy. Okay.
That's a little grim. So when you say like, does it matter? Does it not matter? Like, I mean, one, it matters, but it also matters on the point spread here. So when you're looking at this and going, you've got plus 5.5 up on the board, man, I think 6 is widely available right now, right? So if you're going to take those points, let's get the control room in and switching that right this second.
Ding, ding. Control room. Can you get on that, please?
Especially since like we don't know for sure whether Watson's out, and if you could lock in a plus 6 right now, he comes back, because the number that should be, if the Browns had Watson healthy at home, as all of the circumstances that you mentioned, should be about 3.5, right? Okay. That's what this would be. And so a 5.5, 6, unfortunately for the Browns, is that market telling you that we are leaning to PJ Walker's or somebody else's involvement other than Watson. I don't know if PJ Walker is necessarily going to be better. He's obviously started games in the NFL, has had occasional varied degrees of success. So that's what this number is doing. When Watson gets ruled out, it may go even further. You may get a full plus 7. But if Watson's back in, now all of a sudden plus 6 is a really good deal here. Now it's hard to say how something's a really good deal when you're fading the 49ers, because they are an absolute wagon right now. But look at all these other games that have happened, right? Where it's been big game one week, you have that showdown game, you're the Bills, crushing the Dolphins, you're the Dolphins putting up 70 against the Broncos, and then you come back the next week and you're just not as good, because teams don't play to the same level every single week, right? They play to the top of their range. We have talked about the concept of highs and lows when it comes within a range, right? And so like if the 49ers range is like 60 to 80, they played like an 80 last week, right? And I don't think the Cowboys even played to their kind of pure rating. They were probably on the low end of their range, but these are things that are kind of difficult to sort of decipher. You just mentioned all the different reasons why like the 49ers are probably not going to play like an 80. Like their sort of average rating would be about a 75 in the marketplace. Maybe that goes up because of that win, which again creates more value on the Browns. So normally this would be like Browns, like plus 3.5, Watson, like let's get cooking here. And now it's okay, PJ Walker, like the run game better get going against the 49ers here, and the defense better carry the way. Obviously maybe there's some Brock Purdy turnover regression that sort of props up in this game to keep the Browns in it. So all that is to say, I would certainly go with the Browns before I would go with the 49ers, just based on the spot here. But it's the type of thing that instead of cannonballing into the pool or into Lake Erie or whatever giant puddle might be, in the parking lot of the stadium in Cleveland, it's more like, let's just kind of dip our toe in and then see where this goes, because obviously with the way the line is drifting, it just seems more, or less and less likely that Watson is going to play, and more likely that we're getting something non-Watson from the quarterback position.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, right? That not even a bye week can buy him enough time to be healthy enough to play is kind of crazy, right? Tells like the level of the injury you could be dealing with. So yeah, +6 here is the bet so far for the Cleveland Browns, but stay tuned for the updates on injuries. Check in on the Twitter feeds, as the kids say. Do the kids say that? I don't know. Anyways,
I don't think anybody.
Seahawks.
Well, I still say Twitter because I'm going to say X. So I think
Yeah.
people understand what I say. How many years have to go by before people go like, what's Twitter? It's called X. Like 70 years have to go by. Like, I think I'm fine with calling it Twitter for the rest of my life.
Totally agree with you, my dude. Totally agree. We got the Seahawks at the Bengals. Bengals laying 3 points at home. Seahawks coming off a bye. But the Bengals did not come off of a bye. Jamar Chase proved that he is indeed always open. I never really give stats or write down stat lines, but I feel like 15 receptions for 192 yards and 3 touchdowns.
That's all right.
It's worth a mention. After my guy told you I'm always open.
Yeah.
That is just incredible. I'm here for the diva wide receiver when you can back it up. This game's interesting though. The Bengals laying the 3 points. It's funny how many weeks in a row they've been laying 3 points. It's very interesting to me. But
funny. Yeah.
The Seahawks, I think, can score with them. And I find that to be a very interesting thing. I would hope that they watched during their bye week, maybe come up with something to do with Jamar Chase so that he's not running free. But you're giving me 3 points with the Seahawks. I'm going to take the 3 points with the Seahawks plus the points. Give me the underdogs. I'm on Seattle.
So it's so funny that you mentioned that about them being always 3-point favorites, because of how drastically their rating in the marketplace has switched, right? So like if they were playing the same team every week, they would literally be like 3-point favorites one week and 10-point favorites the next week. Or if they're playing a better team, they'd be 3-point favorites one week and like 6-point underdogs one week. Like that's how crazy it's gone, based on the fact of like, how do we feel about Joe Burrow and his injuries and whatnot, right? Like it just so happens that the team they've played has kind of matched it up so that on the week that everybody thinks that Joe Burrow is back, i.e. the week after they played the Rams, that they were still they were a 3-point favorite on the road against Tennessee. And then it's like, oh, in the weeks that we don't like how Joe Burrow looks, it's like, oh, they're actually playing the Rams at home or the Cardinals on the road. So it's like, oh, geez, that's actually a 3-point favorite still anyway, right? So don't let that fool you that they've been the same, point spread every week.
It's strange, yeah.
It's just the way that this weird season has kind of gone, and it's kind of masked like how drastically the market has, the attitude that they've taken. And so like we talked about it last week, how like we have not seen a lower rating on the Bengals all season long going into that game against Arizona. And so if you think that, okay, Arizona's an underdog, they played pretty well, Cincinnati looks terrible, like we need to bet Arizona, it's like price matters, like take Cincinnati, right? And so, okay, well, what are we at this week? Well, now we're kind of creeping back. We're not in the, we've sort of established that the bad version of the Bengals gets rated as a 45, right? Below average team. The good version of the Bengals, the peak Bengals, is around like a 65. I mean, certainly peak is in prior years are probably closer to a 70, but at least going into the season, they were rated around 65. So this market with this rating is about a 56.
Yeah.
So we're not back, we're sort of like, okay, everybody calm down. It's not like complete death when it comes to the Bengals, but it's also not like they're back. I don't know. I watched that game against the Cardinals, and like Joe Burrow was elusive. He was bopping and scotting back there, like absolutely.
He was moving around,
right? And so if that's the case, it's like, well, why aren't the Bengals quote unquote back to 60, 61? Like it doesn't have to be 66, 67. It can be just better than 56. And so I leapt on Bengals -2.5, which was the line earlier on this week. I obviously was not alone in that matter because the line got bumped up to 3. And when you talk about the Seahawks and you sort of mentioned the idea of them scoring with the Bengals, like I'm not super sure that's true. Like
okay,
that offense against the Giants, I mean, everything else we've seen from the Giants is like they can't tackle, they can't do anything,
It's
yada
very
yada
true.
yada. And in like the Seahawks, they needed a Witherspoon 100-yard, touchdown return to be able to score, quote unquote, enough points to get past even the Giants, right? And like their one big offensive game was against Detroit this season. But as we saw last year, like they do that with Detroit. Like that's the party that those two have when they get together, right? They just get blackout drunk and and just start firing points back and forth, right? Weren't able to score against the Rams, whose defense, or at least certainly weren't able to keep up with the Rams in week 1, whose defense isn't like all that, right? And so I just kind of look at it and I go, I'm not really there with Seattle when it comes to like the offense. And if you go back to the second half of last season, like there's still room to criticize Geno Smith, or at least sort of have this concept of like, yeah, Geno had like a nice run to start the season last year, but like since then the offense just hasn't been that great. I really like the Bengals at home. I think that, you get into that must-win territory. They did it against the Rams. They did it against the Cardinals. And now you have the sort of rejuvenation element of like, okay, Burrow's fine. Like, fine as in like not perfect, but like fine, he's good enough to go here. And if he's good enough to like do the things that Burrow, is capable of doing, and we sort of saw that when he came off the injury report before that game last week, that was the hint, right?
Yeah.
So we get the hint he's off the injury report. We get the actual visual of him like evading tacklers and being elusive back there. Like, why not put the Bengals back to kind of that 60 level and run with this team going forward here? And honestly, they're like plus 450 to win the division. Everything that we've seen out of the Ravens means we might be looking to maybe play something on the Bengals for that as well.
Very true. Very true. The pick is switched. And the one thing I will say is Joe Burrow, obviously, this might be the most obvious statement I've made on this pod this season for sure. But Joe Burrow being healthy and being able to move around in the pocket is kind of a big deal. It definitely changes what this team is capable of. And the fact that they were able to get through him hobbling for the first few games this week, or this season, pardon me, is more of a testament to the rest of the team that's also around him. But if you have Joe Burrow clicking, you have Jamar Chase clicking, it's easy for you to talk me into taking the 3 points. And hey, if they win by 3 and push, cool. But that offense, when it is going, there are very few teams that can keep up. So I'm okay to switch that pick for sure.
Healthy version of the Bengals against even a rating of the Seahawks that has them above league average. That's still like 4.5 for me.
Yeah.
Right. So there's still some value on 3, even though, obviously there's going to be a push a lot of the time. But what if the worst case, the thing that happens is a push, we're okay.
The age-old thing I like to talk about on this pod a lot in terms of weight classes, Seahawks and Bengals in a different weight class for sure. Very interesting, my dude. I appreciate that. That's one pick that's changed for this. Colts at the Jags. Jags at home, laying 4 points. Before I even get to this, though, why aren't the Jags on a bye week? Like they played 2 games in London and now they're just back and they're just like, all right, yeah, we're back at home again. Like no bye week. That just seems kind of odd. That's the thing that has me pausing here because I'm on the Jags laying the 4 points. The Colts, we know Anthony Richardson is out. He's on the IR, which means he has to miss at least 4 games. Is that the rule now?
Yeah.
So the Jags won the first meeting between these 2 teams. My question for you though, again, I'm very confused by them not being on the bye, but also the difference in preparing for when you know that it's Gardner Minshew as opposed to it not being Richardson, who obviously brings a whole different dynamic. I'm on the Jags, but I feel like I'm kind of iffy because I'm worried about the resting in the London thing here, what that means.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, right, they decided that it wasn't going to be necessarily mandatory or whatever to take your bye after any London game, and a lot of teams have just been like, no, we're good with it. And I don't know if that's like body clock situation. If you were ready to play at 9:30 Eastern time, and why would we get off of that when our next game is at 1? Like, if we're ready to go before the game time, the scheduled game time, like why wouldn't we keep running with that? Fundamentally for me here, like you mentioned a couple of different things, right? You mentioned the Jags beating the Colts in that first game. They were lucky to get out of Indianapolis with that victory. We're right back to like Jags as a favorite. And is that something that you want to be involved in? And like, it just kind of never is, right? Like, you're right. They beat Desmond Ridder in London. Like, I don't know that we're going to look back and be like turning point. And the Bills, we talked about like that was kind of a shadow of the Bills selves there. And of course, in the first half, the Bills get, a bunch of guys get hurt. And like that's a conversation, that we'll have when it comes to the Bills playing like really good teams and their outlook going forward as they kind of pile up injuries. But like, it's Colts and Jags, man. Like, I don't know. This is like the homeless man's version of Steelers and Ravens, where it's like, just give me the points. Like,
it's true. I do like
right.
that.
I mean, it is a little bit tricky though, because like the Colts rating, I guess, got like decreased pretty significantly when money just came in on Tennessee last week after we did the pod. I think it was. I think they were around to pick them when we did.
Yeah,
the pod.
It was a pick 'em. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, Colts, let's go. And like by the time the pod runs, it's like, Titans are 2.5-point favorites. I was like, wow, okay. Apparently I don't know the market the way I thought I did. And then the Colts won outright, and everybody wanted to grab some money line on that cash. So what's up?
Do you know what's funny? Like I ended up betting on the Colts at plus 2.5 on Sunday. Yeah, I saw that line on Sunday. I'm like, wait a second. I know this is way too late for the pod, but not for my bank account.
No, and that's the thing, right? Like if we like him at Pick'em, we probably like him at plus 2.5, right? Especially when there was no functional change to anything that happened with regards to like personnel or anything like that, right? So I don't know.
No. Sorry. I was on the Titans. I was on the Titans on the pod. Yeah. I was on the Titans on the pod at Pick'em. And then when it's got to plus 2.5 for the Colts, I was like, wait a second here. If you're telling me just win, and I know like theoretically that doesn't really make sense, but somehow it did make sense. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, wait a second. You're telling me I'm getting like points here? I think I like the points. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that was where I was
plus money on the money line. No, that's right. I'm sorry, I forgot that you had taken the Titans. But I didn't get you to flip.
No, you
didn't
get
you to use the magic mouse to know to change. So like what's the downgrade on the Colts because of Gardner Minshew? And like I guess there is some, but again, I don't really understand this because the market number does sort of suggest that the Jags could be favored by more than this, but again, that's because of a downgrade last week to the Colts, and it's like I didn't think the downgrade was warranted last week, right?
Yeah.
So I would just look at my own ratings when it comes to that, and like that comes out to, let me quickly just give it a look. See here, 3.7. Right. So it's like, okay, we're getting a tiny bit of value here on the Colts. One thing that I would, take a look at here, Cam Robinson came back last week for the Jags, their left tackle from PED suspension, I believe it was. Hard to parse between gambling, PEDs, and whatnot. But he got hurt at the end of that game. And so I got to, listen, it's Wednesday. We don't have injury reports, et cetera, just yet. I got to make sure. I shouldn't say make sure because, again, I'm on the Colts here. But I, to the degree of which that I'm on the Colts, would certainly be
for sure
affected on whether Robinson is playing. I think because the Jags pass defense has struggled so much this season, I think that Minshew is kind of a better matchup for the Colts, like a better guy to have back there than potentially Richardson. And obviously the Richardson injury is a huge bummer, like fantasy props, all of that stuff, right? It's just dragging, he's just a lot more fun to watch than Minshew, but Minshew should be comfortable. He has partaken in Jacksonville, Duval County before in his life, and probably has a little burr in his saddle. And I always kind of like Minshew a little bit more when he's got a chance to prepare for a game than when he comes in the middle of games, even though he's done fine when he's come in the middle of games against the Texans and obviously last week against the Titans here. So yeah, he's arguably the best backup quarterback in the league, and I'm fine with taking some points with him this week.
Our cracked crew in the back studio has changed the pick here. We're on the Colts +4. The big thing that got me to switch here with this pick was just the logic of the way these two teams always play each other. Just take the points. If the Jags somehow like blow them out, win by a touchdown, whatever, cool. I'll tip my cap to the Jags. But to say that the Jags are gonna to actually lay my money and be like, I am confident in the Jags, they're gonna take care of business. That's not really a place that I ever.
Especially if you have questions about not taking the bye week after the London game, right? We don't know what that necessarily means, but it might mean something.
My other question too is, who was a guy? There was a guy a couple years ago who was the backup, who would always come in and just do real well. It wasn't Gardner Minshew. It was another dude. I'm forgetting his name. No, I'm forgetting his name. He had long hair too. and he was
What
like a
team?
career backup, and he bounced around from one place to the next, but he was like always solid when he came in. And now I can't remember his name, and it's going to come back to me at some point throughout this pod, and I will just move on because it's
Okay.
going to bother me.
All right.
I'm going to look it up while you talk about the next game, which, for the record, the next game is the Vikings at the Bears. Vikings laying 2.5 points on the road. I don't think I would have liked the Vikings laying points on the road with Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
Can't say that I like them laying points on the road without Justin Jefferson. I know it's only 2.5 points. The Bears, I don't want to be so fooled by the Bears, but because of the fact that the Commanders decided we weren't going to cover DJ Moore at all and just let him basically run crazy over them the entire game. Here, we'll let you catch the ball and then break tackles, and it was insane performance. Either way, though, confidence. Maybe the Bears get a little confidence. They got a little extra time to prepare. I feel like you should be ready for this game while the Vikings figure out, how do we move forward without Justin Jefferson? We don't really talk about receivers making that much of a difference, but if there's a receiver that does make that much of a difference, it's Justin Jefferson. Give me the Bears plus the points at home. Home dogs here. I'm rolling with the Bears. Let's go.
Yeah, so obviously the question is like how much, right? And it's really kind of tricky to decipher from a rating standpoint based off of if we just look at last week, right? So think about it this way. Bears go to Washington, are 6-point underdogs against Washington, right? And we talked about on the show, like, I don't know if I don't like laying points, period, but I certainly don't like laying points when it's a team like Washington, which is like maybe on a good day, they're an average team, right? Yeah, like that, and you'd be just a straight fade of the Bears. And, you know, we had talked about how the Bears had been sort of announced in a recent article about like team, you know, who's the worst team, who's the worst rated team by odds makers in the league. And it was the Bears. And, you know, obviously they lose to the Broncos. And it's like, as much as like that's kind of a drag for the Bears, like that's usually the time to buy in the NFL, right? When somebody says you're the worst at something, like it might be go time when it comes to buy. Like that's how, you know, being profitable in the NFL works. Like you have to bet on the bad teams, especially when there's elements to a team that you might like. Like, you know, again, Bears, obviously their offense worked pretty nicely against the Broncos. They went and worked pretty nicely against the Commanders, another like pretty porous defense. What do we have here in the Vikings? Pretty porous defense, right? And so the problem is the Bears rating from last week was so low because they were 6-point underdogs to the Commanders. Then you've got the Vikings who, you know, we weren't getting any deals betting on the Vikings last week. They probably should have covered, and they had a very real chance of winning that game outright. You had 3rd and 18 conversions against them. You had some really sketchy penalty scenario happening at the end of the game. And then obviously, like, you know, Alexander Mattison can't catch a pass that was probably going to go to the house on a screenplay. And so you weren't getting any deals on the Vikings, right? So the Vikings were getting a lot of respect in the market by pulling that number down. I think it closed 3.5 against the Chiefs, right? So it's like the Vikings are getting rated up here going into last week, and the Bears are getting rated like way, way, way down here. So the number, if you just took those ratings for this game, would be Vikings -6. Now, if you sit there and you're like, in your own personal ratings, you're like, well, you know, as much as the Vikings had a chance to win that game last week, like that was a little bit ridiculous as far as a point spread is concerned, right? 4.5 was probably appropriate, maybe even 5. 6, you know, that was probably too far. But 3.5 was, you know, if you had said at the start of the week that it was just 3.5 Chiefs, I imagine Chiefs money probably would have come in and drove it up. That's just kind of how the psychology of this works.
I would have bet even more on the Chiefs.
Yeah, I would have mortgaged. I would have taken a second mortgage on my home. So all that is to say, like it was that 6 number was coming down because the Vikings rating was going to come down to sort of a more salient place, not by a ton, but a little bit. And that number was probably coming down because the Bears aren't the worst team in the NFL, right? They had their low point. And so now it's like, okay, we have to tick them back up. There are certainly, you know, teams that are worse than them. And so it obviously isn't 6. So doing all that sort of math, you get into the Vegas zone at 4 or 4.5, right? Well, now we're at 2.5. And obviously what's the big change? The big change is that Justin Jefferson is out. And so Justin Jefferson being out in this game, does that drag this, you know, is it appropriate that this number gets dragged below a key number of 3? I don't have the answer for you in that situation, you know, in this circumstance right this second, because we don't know yet. All I can really tell you is that, like, what are other comparably important players that we have seen miss games this year? And I'm going to go back to the Travis Kelce thing from week 1, where it was like, yeah, the number came down 1.5 points. Remember, it was like 6, and then it went down like 4.5. And that didn't really even cross a key number. But like, if you watch that game, you're like, man, if the Chiefs had Travis Kelce here, I bet they win the game, right? And so I can't help but think, if we're watching this game on Sunday, even though, like, from a value standpoint, if we don't think that Justin Jefferson or a non-quarterback doesn't mean that much to the spread, I can't help but think, like, maybe he does, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Definitely.
right? Maybe he does mean a lot in the same way that Travis Kelce did. And so, like, yeah, I know we're not getting like great value here. I think this is more like you take the money line on the Bears versus like kind of messing around with the point spread, especially at 2.5. Like, it's just more likely here that, like, it's a disaster for the Vikings without Justin Jefferson. And that disaster, along with a, you know, pretty bad defense and the Bears finding whatever they found from an offensive standpoint, can just take advantage of that and win. Or the Vikings are fine, at least for one game, against a bad Bears team. Don't get me wrong, they are still a bad Bears team. And they, you know, cover 2.5 because it's just a field goal, right? So, like, I don't know that it's like this is going to come down to the wire. I kind of think either team wins by 10 type of a situation here.
Yeah, super interesting game for sure. And looking forward to what could be a blow up potential for the Vikings if things start to go really south here and Justin Jefferson's out for the next little while.
Our Kirk Cousins to the Jets trade that we cooked up a couple weeks ago is looking more and more likely by the minute.
Totally true, my friend. We move on to the Saints at the Texans. Saints on the road laying 1.5 in Houston. Texans lost a close one last week to the Falcons. That game was down to the wire. Great game there. Meanwhile, the Saints blew out the Patriots. And if there's one thing we learned, that the Patriots do stink, which we will get to them in a second. I like the Texans here. And I really just don't want to be swayed too much by what happened with that Saints-Patriots game last week, just because the Patriots are just such a mess. The Saints, meanwhile, now you're in Houston, and I feel like I just like Houston. I like that Stroud really takes care of the ball. There's no like major glaring mistakes being made. He's not going to go Mac Jones against the Saints, which I feel like the Saints needed Mac Jones to go Mac Jones to make that game what it was last week. Right. Even though still it's a low number, but you're giving me a bit of points. I'll take the points with Houston in this one.
Yeah, I certainly like this more than I did the Texans last week. And it was so funny. And we just talked about like the idea of like, is, 2.5 point spread, does that matter? Is it going to land anywhere? It's like, well, the Falcons covered -1.5 and they didn't cover -2.5 last week. Right. But like, that's the Falcons. And I talked about, I wrote about in, my best bets column, like, I don't really want to mess with the Falcons, giving 2 points or dealing with that. Like, let's just throw them with the Dolphins in a money line parlay and just get that number down to essentially a flat pick 'em. With this, I was very quick after watching that game to take the Texans here on the money line at +120 early on when it first opened up. Now that number's down to about +105, and of course the point spread's down from 2.5 to +1.5 here. It was the type of thing where it was like at 2.5, you go like, are we going to get 3? And then you just sit there and you go like, if I know the market, and I believe that I do, people aren't going to wait around to see if we can get 3 with the Texans. And they weren't, right? They were like, give me the 2.5, give me the money line the same way that I did. So that's how I'm playing this game, whether you want the 1.5 or not. Listen, the Saints, we'll get into the Patriots game. Like, like that was a disaster. I think that was a little bit more about or maybe a lot more about the Patriots than about the Saints. Still just not crazy about the Saints. And again, the Texans, especially at home, like, they're feeling it a little bit. Like, that was a really impressive road performance that I didn't think they necessarily had in them just yet. And so whether or not, you grade your, whatever line you had as a win or a loss on whatever side, like hopefully you landed on the correct side. Who might, the listener out there, whether it was +2.5 on the Texans or -1.5 on the Falcons, like, I thought that was a really impressive performance by the Texans. Like, defensively, maybe not as great because you're getting Desmond Ritter's throwing for 300+ yards off of a passing yard total of 175. Like, That was hilarious, by the way. So yeah, like I don't know that, Derek Carr and company are going to take advantage of that. Like they might, but from a rating standpoint, like there's certainly nothing wrong with taking the Texans this week. Whereas last week it was, maybe, getting ahead of ourselves. And, I don't know that it is this week.
It's funny because I had Texans +2 last week on the pod when we discussed it.
Right.
And then so that pushes. And then I had them betting wise on Sunday at 2.5. So it's just an interesting look into what we do on the pod here, right? We have the discussion, you have your thought, you have your opinion, and then you see where the line is on Sunday if you go make your bets then, and you figure out.
Or at any point between listening and Sunday, right? Because there are bets where it's like, get on this now. And then there are bets where it's like, well, let's just kind of see where it goes, right? Mm-hmm. And hopefully we get that across to people.
Yeah, and it's always a thing too where the bets that I'm talking about that I'm making on Sunday morning, it's kind of things where I'm looking at and being like, ooh, that seems a little different. Okay, here, let me, I like this. Let me jump on that here. I'm getting an extra half point. That might come in handy here. And you know what? It did. Funny how that works, isn't it?
And that'll change your record in a more significant way than you ever think, right? And that just shows like the razor's edge that this whole league is on, right? And so the idea of like something being 0-1 or being 1-0 and like valuing your betting life on it, like just doesn't make any sense, right? So like put more into it than just sort of like what the record is.
Totally. Definitely. We keep it moving though here with I struggled to type here with the Cardinals at the Rams. Rams at home laying 7 points. NFC West battle here. I've liked the Rams. I've liked betting on the Rams. I was on them last week, even though they didn't cover, but they're still a spicy team for me. I feel though that in this one, 7 points might be a little too much for me to lay here with the Rams. I don't know if I'm that comfortable with them here laying that many points.
Sure.
7's a lot against a functional team. And I still think the Cards are a functional team, even if Dobbs hasn't been playing as well as he did to start the season. I'm going to take the Cards here +7. I just think 7's too many points here for the Rams.
Yeah, and the Cards are an interesting outfit because it's like they have a defensive coordinator, head coach, but the defense is the bad part. Yeah. And the offense is the good part, right? And which like nobody saw coming because it's like, who's on the offense? It's like just a bunch of randoms, right? That they kind of just picked up, off of the scrap heap or prospects, first round picks, or not first round picks, but draft picks that, like we talked about like Michael Wilson last week. It's like, who's that guy? I don't know. Yeah, this number's out to 7. It opened 6, and like I was kind of fine with taking 6, but that being said, I shouldn't be that surprised, I suppose, because again, I think that the rating for that game or the point spread for the game last week against the Bengals was more about the Bengals being downgraded than the Cardinals being upgraded, because you're never going to upgrade the Cardinals after getting blown out, a 20-point loss to the 49ers the previous week. So Cardinals, I think their rating stays where it is. Like I literally have it at 25. Like that is, around worst team in the league status right now, right?
Yeah.
And that would sort of cook up a 7.4 point spread on the Rams. So I think that is why this is sort of stretched out. But it's the type of thing that like, we talk about this with all kinds of teams, and the Rams are no different. The position of going from 7-point underdog, 3-point underdog to being the favorite, and now needing to cover a number, taking a big lead, holding that big lead.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure like the defense is necessarily built for that, right? Yeah. And so like the Rams are a shootout style team where, right up into the end there, I thought they might cover last week against the Eagles, right? It's like, yeah, you're hanging around, just stay within a touchdown of the number, and like, let's just get that touchdown late. And now they weren't able to do that, but it's like, that's the play. That's how I want to play the Rams this year. I don't want to play the Rams to like blow a team out because I just haven't seen that yet. The tricky part for the Rams is like we have to get in the time machine to deal with the Rams. We got to go back to where like week 4 last season when Cooper Kupp was healthy, Matthew Stafford was healthy, Aaron Donald was healthy, right? Like those 3 guys doing what they do on the respective sides of the ball, like that changes the Rams rating. That again would make you want the Rams, especially at -6, -6.5, because you're thinking of them, maybe not necessarily as the defending Super Bowl champions the way that they were a year ago, but certainly a very good team. And so it's like, what am I supposed to do with the Rams? Like, I can't, are they above an above average team? Are they like, are they that? I don't know that we know the answer to that yet, because they keep playing like the Bengals on the road on Monday Night Football and the 49ers and the Eagles at home.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they could cover this game. It's just they haven't had this situation where they've had to. And so I think, the Cardinals are the sort of side here at +7. It's just, I'm not going to be surprised if the Rams blow them out and the Rams sort of kind of get back to the level where they were a year ago, essentially, before these guys got hurt, right? But again, even before they got hurt, the Rams offense wasn't particularly great anyway. So when I say like the level they used to be, I certainly don't think like, Super Bowl contender or anything crazy like that. I'm just sort of saying like around, like slightly above average. They have not been rated above average yet this season, and we are getting closer and closer to that rating. And we'll see whether that's fair or not this weekend.
Totally. And for me, I feel like I see the number, it's 7. I need the Rams to show me that they can, that I should feel comfortable in laying 7 points with them against anyone. And I'm not there yet. So I'm going to have to see it here, and I'll take the points with Arizona. As mentioned, we keep it pumping here with the Eagles. Speaking of 7-point favorites, the Eagles are a team I'm comfortable with laying 7 points. I know it's 7 points on the road against the Jets, but the Jets, they do things against the Broncos. I'm not going to be fooled by that. And even with them putting up points, that was a lot of Broncos doing a lot of Broncos type things to help the Jets put points on the board. The Eagles do things that travel. Normally with teams, if I'm talking about covering a big spread, and a touchdown spread is pretty big. If I'm doing that on the road, I need to trust in a few things that travel, and the Eagles do those things. They run the ball and they play defense. That travels. It's a tough one to lay the 7 on the road, but I'm going to do this, and I'll take a push on if they win by a touchdown. But I'm on the Eagles laying the 7 points just because not having none of the Jets.
Yeah, that's fair. I hate this game. I
definitely do.
I don't really, especially now it's 7, where it's just like at least 6.5. I go like, you can talk yourself into laying that, but like the requirement here for the Eagles to win by more than a touchdown, don't really. Listen, it's not like the Eagles can't do that. Like, the Eagles are a very good team, right? Like, it's more just like defensively, the Jets defense hasn't been like all that it's sort of cracked up to be. But again, speaking of cracks, there are cracks to the Eagles offense where like the wide receivers are still like kind of bummed out. And like, where's Devontae Smith been? And like the coordination of the Eagles offense, unless Jalen Hurts is running, and last week he decided he was going to run a ton,
he had to.
Or had success in running a ton, right? Whether he sort of wants to or sort of he can. If the Jets play defense against him the way every other team except for the Rams last week played defense against him from a running perspective, then like I think this game sort of shrinks from like a total points perspective, which means it shrinks from like a point spread perspective.
Totally.
And like I think the Jets can do that. Now, I mean, Russell Wilson got a little loose last week, and there was one long rush against the Jets defense. And then fundamentally, it comes back to like, all right, where are we with Zach Wilson, right? And where are we with like the Jets offensive line being able to open holes for Breece Hall? Because Breece Hall looked awesome against the Broncos defense. But again, what's the key element to that sentence? The Broncos defense, right? It's just like, ugh, gross. Like, like that. It's it's almost not even sort of worth saying. But like, stopping the run and running the football, like that'll get you a long way, even in today's NFL, especially when the passing game for the Eagles hasn't exactly been like amazing to watch. So I guess this is me saying like lean Jets. It's one that I would love, like a home underdog, throw them in the money line parlay, thinking they have a chance to win. I can't get there necessarily, right?
Exactly.
It's more like maybe it's an Eagles tease -7 down to -1 with something else you like this week.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm right there with you in terms of almost being able to take the Jets. I just can't put myself in that position where I'm going to be watching that game on Sunday and just being mad at Zach Wilson doing Zach Wilson-y things and they lose by 10 or whatever, right? Like, tough one there. Tough one here with two teams in terms of the Patriots and the Raiders. The Raiders on Monday night, I mean, I was on the Packers heavy, so watching that game was very frustrating for me. But Jimmy G still showed me the signs of being Jimmy G, so I'm not really fooled by that. With that said,
Mhm.
for all the smoke I got for Jimmy G, Mac Jones, wow.
Macaroni. What are we doing out there, bro?
Yeah, it's just atrocious at this point. I don't even understand how, like, I mean, it's not like Zappy came in and he was ready to go either, but I mean, the clock's got to be ticking on Mac Jones here because he's just horrible. And I figured that Belichick, year in, year out, one thing he never stood for were turnovers. So I don't know how the leash can be this long on Mac Jones. I don't understand. But anyways,
Yeah.
saying all that, Raiders laying 3 points at home. I'm on the Raiders just because Mac Jones, like, bro, I can't conceivably look at you and say I'm relying on you to do anything other than turn the ball over and thus give the ball away.
Yeah.
Every week for the last how many weeks I've said, oh, well, the Patriots got to figure something out. They got to figure something out. And then it gets worse. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm on the Raiders. I can't say I like it, but I definitely can't be backing the Patriots on the road.
Right.
That's what makes it tough for me here.
So, yeah. So what makes it tough for me is I watched
McDaniels thing, and they're going to be ready for.
I mean, for the love of God, McDaniels is awful, and like the Packers losing that game to McDaniels, like going, kicking the field goal from 50 million yards away is just like
he should be fired just for that.
Just for that, and like every week it's something else, right? And it's like McDaniels is laying points to Bill Belichick. Like, what on earth is going on here, right? But it's like the problem with this is you watch the Patriots last week, and you have Patriots in the like day that it was +1.5 for the Patriots, and you tease them up to +7, +7.5, and you sit there and you watch 2 touchdowns, and you just go, well, that teaser's dead because like they can't come back from 2 touchdowns to even get it within 1 touchdown. Like you just watch it and you're like, we're toast here. Yeah. What happened from the team that was competitive against the Eagles and the Dolphins to what this garbage is that they're running out there this week? And I think from a betting standpoint, that's the key, because you're watching that game against the Saints and you're saying what? You're saying never again. Never again with the Patriots. But what you need to be saying from like a prudent betting standpoint is never again at this rating.
Ooh.
Right?
Okay.
Because the rating equals the price equals the points.
Okay.
So if it's never again at this rating, the rating of the Patriots, even with the blowout loss to the Cowboys and the rest of the season, had hung out right at like 50 out of 100.
Okay.
They were a purely average team because the belief was like, Belichick's going to get this thing figured out, guys. We got this. Like, just wait until they play a bad team or a mediocre team at home. Like, suckered me in to the point of, putting the teaser together on them. Mm-hmm. And so if you're sitting there and going never again, that's your first mistake. No, I don't mean that specifically to the Patriots. I just mean that in general when it comes to betting on the NFL. But if you're saying never again at this price or at this rating, I am fine with that. So you go, okay, well, at this rating, what is the price supposed to be for this game? And the answer to that is about a pick 'em with the Raiders. Right? And so if this game was a pick 'em, what would we be saying? Never again, because I'm never rating the Patriots as a 50, as an average team, right?
Oh, I'm so getting sucked in right now.
Against a below average Raiders team who, like, congrats on the win on Monday, but like nothing I saw on Monday was like, yeah, Raiders, here we come. Right.
I saw the Jimmy G happy feet in the pocket. I saw that. Yeah. I'm like, that looks familiar to me.
Jimmy G's happy feet. Josh McDaniels, like, train wreck of a thing. And like, by the way, we already knew that the Packers offensive line was a problem.
Can I say something
Max Crosby is always going to be an issue there.
Can I say something too that I found very interesting from that Packers game? And this is like inside. So only if you were like locked into this game, you notice this. There was a key play down the stretch where it was another 3rd down conversion where it was the play after, for some strange reason, the Packers decided to have a linebacker try to cover Devontae Adams. Right. Don't know why that was part of the game plan, but cool. So it was just after that. It was like the next 3rd down play. Right. And you could tell that the DBs, they were playing a zone, but they instructed the corner, Devontae Adams is going to run a slant.
Yes.
You stand there and make the play.
And just intercept it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the guy just didn't.
Of course, Jimmy G huts the ball. He's staring down Devontae Adams, throws it right there. And the DB, I don't know what he was doing, but the safety's like screaming at him, like, we just talked about this play. And I'm watching this thinking,
we just had this conversation.
Yeah. I'm watching this thinking of like, whoa, that reminds me of the Malcolm Butler. Like, it reminded me of like the same sort of scenario where it's just like, you know, a good team is prepared, but then also executes. Right. Yeah. Because they ran that play. If you remember, the reason why the Malcolm Butler play happened was because they ran it over and over and over again in practice until he stopped getting beaten on it. Yeah. I'm not relating the two things in terms of 1 week to the next. Sure. I'm just saying that thing was funny watching it because my initial thought right away when I saw it, I was like, dude, like you could see the frustration from the other DB. Like, you were right there. Like, that's what we told you their play.
Right. But he was literally like, we knew it. He said, you could see him say, we knew it, bro. We knew it.
So I say all that to say, you're facing the Patriots, and there is a McDaniel factor where there's going to be some familiarity on both sides. But you have me here. You have me here. I'll let you continue because I'm about to change my pick.
Well, so my question to you was, like, if we say never again at the rating of 50 out of 100, right? Dead nuts, mediocre team.
Yeah.
What, Sheldon, you know, I don't know if we did this last week, but, you know, I like doing it. What's the number out of 100 for the Patriots? Like, just
they're definitely got to be below average. I don't know if I take them all the way down to like a 40, but they got to be hovering around like 42, 43, something like that.
Okay.
Because they're below average.
So I'll tell you what about 37?
Cool. You could talk me into that for sure.
But even 37 puts this at about Vegas -2.5 for me. So you got to go even lower than 40. You got to go lower than 37 for a Patriots rating. And maybe that's just where we are right now. Maybe the Patriots are a 35 because of the injuries that have piled up. And when I say, like, what happened since since the first couple of weeks, the answer is like, yeah, a bunch of injuries have happened. So, like, stuff has happened to make the Patriots worse. But, like, again, the story of the NFL this season is like, it's bad, but is it that bad? And then it actually being that bad, right? Yeah. Or like we would we'd have way more correct than we do, and we've been doing quite fine this season, right? So it's just like, never again, but this rating, like maybe again with the Patriots at +3 because I can't upgrade the Raiders for that performance last week. I can't do it. So
can't do it.
At least if I'm talking myself into the Patriots, I'm understanding what the new rating for the Patriots is and buying them at that rating, which is way better than buying them at the rating they were at last week.
Yeah. I mean, all in all, this is just a tough one here. And I mean, laying points with McDaniels and Jimmy Garoppolo on a short week. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. The pick has changed. New England +3. Give me all the points. We will continue with the Commanders at the Falcons. Falcons at home, laying 2.5 points. Washington with some extra rest, having not played since when? Like last Thursday. They got smashed by the Bears, but they've had a lot of time to think about it. The Falcons, I mean, I just don't think the Falcons, you're laying points with the Falcons. That's not a place that I want to be really with the Falcons. And if you're telling me the Commanders coming off, they need a bounce back a little bit here. I'm not saying that they're way better than the Falcons, but I'd definitely rather take the points here with the Commanders. I cannot take the Falcons here laying points. I don't want to be in that position where I'm laying points with the Falcons. So give me the Commanders and the points.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's like we just talked about a couple of games ago when talking about this game from a Texans perspective. It's like, the likelihood of the Falcons winning by 1 or 2 is for some reason so much higher than any other team. I feel like winning by 1 or 2 points, that like a couple of points has some value. And again, think about what was required for them to win by 2 points. Desmond Ridder just slinging ball around, right? And like maybe he can do that against the Commanders defense because we just saw Justin Fields do that. And like, I don't know that DJ Moore is on the Falcons, right? Like I don't think like Drake London was awesome, and that's you give that guy a chance to actually catch passes. Like look at what can potentially happen. So would you be shocked if the Commanders won in Atlanta? Like I wouldn't, especially coming off of what was probably a pretty embarrassing loss for them. These teams are kind of all in the same pile for me, right? Where it's just like, throw the Raiders in there, throw a bunch of these teams where it's like, yeah, I still think they're below average. I still think the Falcons are below average. The market has rated them as below average. Them winning by 2 points against the Texans at home last week doesn't, speaking of another team you could throw into this pot, the Texans might be good enough to be sort of quote unquote below average. Like, I don't know that like a lot has to kind of be sort of, broken down here. The Bears won that game because they were willing to throw the ball. They almost blew the game because they stopped throwing the ball. Mm-hmm. It wasn't because of the run game, and that's what the Falcons want to do. And so if the Falcons want to play run game against the Washington strength, i.e. their front four, a mad, a bitter, an angry, a rested front four, then okay, like I just the matchup was so good for the Falcons last week. And they just barely managed to pull it off. That the matchup is so much better for the Commanders this week, and we're getting points that actually might matter because of how sort of weird the Falcons play these games in like 1917 type fashion, both the score and the year. Give me the Commanders.
No, I'm with you there.
1917? I don't know if they were. Probably not. They were busy having World War I think.
Jeez.
World War I there was a movie called 1917. World War I was a fact. All right, like
this is correct.
We had bigger issues in 1917 than NFL football.
You are correct, my friend. You are correct. We keep it moving though with the Panthers at the Dolphins. We got a couple big boy games, big boy spreads, I should say. Not really big boy games at all. Big boy spreads. Panthers at the Dolphins. Dolphins laying 13.5 points at home. Last week, I was on the Dolphins with the big spread against the Giants, and that was they barely hung on to that with Tyrod Taylor coming in, and the Giants were still like calling timeouts late and like moving the ball around. I'm like, yo, does Dable have the Giants to cover this big number here? Like, what was it made no sense. Like, they were actually down multiple touchdowns and calling timeouts still. I was like, what's happening in this game? Anyways, Dolphins cover last week, the big spread. This week, they get another one against the Panthers. 13.5 points is a lot. I can't say I like this. I'm going the opposite of what I normally do. Normally, as you know, I will be on the points and get you to talk me out of it. In this instance, because I have yet to see much from the Panthers that tell me that they have any idea, and especially last week when they just got run over by the Lions, looking at it from this game thinking, can't the Dolphins just run over them too? I don't know.
Yeah.
Let me know. What 13.5 is a lot, so I can easily be talked out of this.
Yeah, listen, I'm not running to do it right now. I think it touched 14 briefly. I would need 14 for the Panthers. I don't really have any interest in betting the Dolphins right now. I think anything sort of barely functional last week probably gets in the back door against the Dolphins. Now, it helped that the Giants literally had 100-yard, speaking of, the irony of the NFL, right? Like the Giants, after getting crushed on a 100-yard touchdown return, they get a 100-yard interception return. And of course that doesn't matter because they're playing the Dolphins and they're getting smoked anyway. That being said, like Carolina defense better than the Giants. Weirdly enough, the offense is better than the Giants. They've got more sort of effort, if you will. If Bryce Young happened to get hurt, Andy Dalton is probably a better option for covering a big number. Whereas like with Daniel Jones getting hurt, Tyrod Taylor is not a better option at throwing the football and covering a big number from sort of a backdoor perspective. But I think there's a reason we're probably not getting 14. You know what I mean? It's like 13.5. Like when you look at that number, you just go, oh, Dolphins by 2 touchdowns. And you immediately start to think that way, right? Whereas if it was 14.5, like this is sort of the psychological element of this, because this number is largely, I don't want to say made up, right? But it's not sort of based on anything other than like what do we want people to bet, or like what do we think
Yeah.
people are going to want to bet, because this number for me probably should have been, from a market rating perspective, obviously Carolina being 9.5 at Detroit last week. And yeah, there were some injuries for Detroit, but like it was 9.5 early on in the week when we didn't necessarily think those Detroit injuries were going to be an issue.
For sure.
Is going to Detroit and going to Miami like that much of a big difference? Like, I don't really think that it is. Like, Detroit's pretty good. Like, I know the Dolphins get credit for being, high octane or whatever, but I don't know that the Dolphins are that much better than the Lions. I think the Lions have showed us enough that like they should be in the same conversation as the Dolphins, right?
What I would say to that, though, I feel like the reality of that is true. Like, I feel like the Lions and Dolphins are close, but I don't know if the perception that people have of those teams are that yet.
Well,
like,
and the perception is built the line, right? And that's why we got 4 points difference in the line here, right? And you'll say, well, like the Panthers didn't cover against the Lions. And it's like, that's true. But at least, again, they battled towards the end there, right? And so, listen, I'm making a long case for a bet that I'm like very lukewarm on, especially at 13.5. But I just think like that's the why that it's at 13.5, because I think Carolina has a chance to kind of, again, linger just long enough. I'm talking like being down 35, 14 and like, just be like, oh, okay, well, this game's over. And then like, they get a touchdown or and a field goal, something along those lines. Now you don't want to bank, your whole deal on a backdoor cover. So I need to bet this with 14, thinking that the Panthers can hang around. And the Dolphins had that game last week where it was like, man, we just got punked by the Bills. We got to bring it. That's not their mind state, right?
This week,
game, right? So that's where sort of I'm thinking like this could be sort of a linger around a little bit type of situation for the Panthers. And if it gets out of hand, they can kind of, again, get under the number here.
Okay, here's what I'm doing. I'm not changing the pick. I was so close.
I feel like you wanted to take the Panthers in the first place.
I did.
But the 13.5 was sort of like a thing where you're like, I can cover 13.5, right? And like that's totally fine. But like all of a sudden it's 31-20, and like the Dolphins are running a 5-minute, drill. They're down an explosive player in Devon Achane. So like again, like the stuff that you're supposed to be scared of the Dolphins, like it took. 5% of that is gone. Like, at least that's something.
The pick is getting changed. Ladies and gentlemen. We are doing this live. The control room is scrambling right now. We are changing this pick on the fly.
Yeah.
We are going from Dolphins minus 13.5 to Carolina plus 13.5. And I'm going to say
an understanding to like, don't bet it until, or I shouldn't say don't bet it until, but like, don't bet it now. Wait to see if we can get 14.
For sure.
By Sunday morning, that just never happens, then take the 13.5. And by the way, if it drops to 13, like that's probably a good sign that we're actually on the right sort of side here. So even 13 would be okay.
And I'm saying this right now on the pod. So listen to me right now. I'm taking this at 13.5 and know that if it goes to 14, I am also on the Panthers. I'm making that known because I'm saying sometimes I don't say that on the pod, right? Sometimes I don't say that on the pod, and I'll come back next week and give myself an L. You know what I mean? But I'm saying it openly right now. If this gets to 14 on Sunday and it's Carolina plus 14 is the bet.
What if it's 12.5?
If it's 12.5, no. I'm saying if it goes up. If it goes,
of course it goes up. If the price gets better, of course you're going to be on the
for sure. But if it goes to 12.5, then my bet is locked in at 13.5. That's what I'm saying.
But what I'm saying is like, if you're not, I'm saying don't bet it now. Wait till it comes to 14. If it goes the other direction, what do you do? Because last week that went the other direction. And
totally. The reason I'm saying this more so is for like whatever the pick ends up being on the pod.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Your record, unfortunately, the quote unquote, record for the pod will show 13.5. I think we're in agreement here. Like, just wait around, try to get 14. But like, my point is like, if it goes down to 13, like, it's not like the public is pouring money in on the Panthers. The point is, if it goes to 13, then like I would still bet Carolina because I feel like, if it lands exactly on 13 and we get a push, it's like, Okay, it sucks that we missed out on a win, but like the market is indicating that Carolina is probably the right side. My concern is if it goes to like 12.5. Now listen, 13 is not some key number, but if my ratings have it as a 12.5 point spread, it wouldn't be the first time that by the time Sunday rolled around, the line was 12.5, right? And so I'm just sort of saying like, hey, if it's 12.5, like would you still bet it come Sunday?
That's a good question.
No, I know it's a good question.
I would say that I would still bet. No. At that point, I'd probably bet the Dolphins.
Flipping at 12.5. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's not unfair. I just wouldn't want to fade the line move that would clearly be some sort of indicator of some sharper bettors that waited like we are.
Yeah.
Couldn't get it and then said, screw it, let's just get 13. Now, if you're sitting there and you're watching this and you're watching it go from 13.5 to 13, like jump on the
12.
13, right? Like get it before it like gets to the sort of bottom, right? Like that's all I'm saying.
Okay. I'm with you. I understand.
Wait for
I understand
14,
what you're
grab
saying.
13. That's the final thing. Wait for 14, grab 13. Done.
I'm with you. Sorry, I'm making notes here as we go along. As we switch to the Giants, speaking of 14-point spreads, the Giants are at the Bills. I'm going to say here, I'm laying the 14 points with the Bills. And the reason, I know the conversation we just had, but the reason here is the Giants, man, like, I don't know if they can score 14 points. And if they do, they're going to struggle to score 14 points.
Right.
And so then I'm just asking the Bills to get to 30. Do you know what I mean? Like
the bully Bills, right?
Yeah. And this is a prime spot for the Bills coming off a loss last week. We've seen this scenario before. Bills lose. They play a crappy team next week. Hey, everything's fine. Stephon Diggs is all happy again. He's dancing in the end zone. Good times. Bills Mafia going crazy, telling us they're going to Super Bowl again. Cool. I'll lay the 14 points here with the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, I'm not going to bet on this game. This is stupid. Not on the side. It's not an unfair, we just talked about like the Carolina Miami thing, right?
Yeah,
I think the numbers, 11.5, 12 is sort of fair, but the market, odds makers know people are going to want to bet the Dolphins. Yada yada yada, so it gets bumped up. This is actually like 14.5 is pretty fair as far as the numbers that we have seen in the market, previously speaking of. And the Giants right now are, we might see come Monday that they're rated as the worst team in the NFL. And that obviously includes the fact that like Daniel Jones, potentially doesn't play and all of that sort of thing. The Bills have a ton of injury issues. Their depth is good enough to beat the Giants. I don't know if their depth is good enough to win all of the other games they have on their schedule, or sort of, the amount of games that they're going to need to keep pace with the Dolphins. Long term, this is a problem for the Bills. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use the Bills in Survivor this week. Survivor play of the week is the Bills. Speaking of set it and forget it, and just laugh while the Bills like hammer the Giants this week. And the reason we're sort of using the Bills earlier, we're not saving the Bills, because the Bills are like 2 injuries away on defense from this getting like very dicey. And they have a tough schedule coming up. So there's only a couple of teams that you'd even consider using the Bills at home, against, if you will. And they're not as bad as the Giants, because at this point, basically nobody is. So this is like, get it while it's good, or while it's before the wheels kind of come off here. And again, it's not going to be the Bills' fault. And maybe the offense ends up being good enough to win them the division or get them into the playoffs. But like, go through it like one by one. Like, it doesn't look like Von Miller is necessarily like ready to like be an impact player. They lost a defensive tackle last week. They lost Matt Milano, who has always been kind of this like secret engine. I don't want to say secret, but like low, underrated engine to that defense. And they lost their best cornerback the week before that. Like, who else do you have to lose here going down each level of the defense, even internal and external, when it comes to the defensive line and the outside linebacker and core? Like, how many more do you have to lose before it's just like, we just can't keep up with teams that are, sort of on their way up, right? Like Bengals, Ravens, obviously Dolphins, Chiefs, Chargers, et cetera, right? Like, it's a problem. So like use them now before somebody else gets hurt, essentially, when it comes to Survivor.
An ugly one there and a huge spread, but sets up a pretty decent Monday night football matchup here. You got the Cowboys laying 2 points on the road in LA against the Chargers. This is an interesting one to me here. The Cowboys, we saw them do what the Cowboys, we expected the Cowboys to do against the Niners. I feel like the Niners, it's a different weight class for the Cowboys. The Chargers might be more within their realm, but either way, I don't know about laying points with the Cowboys on the road. Definitely not going to be in that position. The Chargers are always a team. We talked about, I think was the Titans earlier, where we said, I like when I'm getting points with the Chargers. If I'm getting points with the Chargers at home, that's a much more comfortable spot that I'd like to be. Sure. But the main thing here, I got to look at the Cowboys overall season and realize that they've looked really, really good. All the talk about how good the Cowboys are because of wins against the Patriots, the Giants, and the Jets.
Yeah.
For that reason, I'm on the Chargers +2.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. I sort of think about it like, all right, comparable teams to the Cowboys. Who are they? Because it's not the 49ers. It's not the Chiefs. No, probably not the Bills. Maybe it's the it might. I mean, maybe it's the Eagles because of my concerns about the Eagles' offense right now.
Okay.
And just basically how close, sort of how, I don't know how close those games were necessarily last year, but like, each team sort of winning with the other teams, going against the other team's backup. It's possible that like the 49ers are that good that the Cowboys are still at least, in the neighborhood of the Eagles. Okay. But the Dolphins, right? The Dolphins, I think, are around the same sort of quality as the Cowboys. And the Chargers were -3 in the first game of the year at home against the Dolphins. Now you said, I don't want the Cowboys on the road. Are the Cowboys really on the road, right? They have training camp in California. Like they were literally be 90% of the crowd will probably be Cowboys fans again. The usual Chargers, got to use the silent count at home. Like way to go, Chargers ownership. Like you're really putting your team in the best sort of light to succeed. Monday night game means another day for Austin Eckler to get back. And that's obviously a thing when it comes to the red zone and obviously the running game in general and the pass game via short passes. That like is a massive upgrade. Like you just sort of, people sort of, obviously we've degraded the running back position to the point where like Josh Kelly can do it. And it's like, no, he can't. Joshua Kelly cannot do it. Austin Eckler matters. And so it looks like he's going to be back. And so the sort of slow downgrading of the Chargers, if that has happened in the market, which I think it sort of has, if it's kind of like a mini version of the Rams where it's like we needed to shoot them back to like where they were before the season started, then they should probably be at least a pick 'em in this game, right? Like I'm not saying they need to be -3 necessarily in the way that they were against the Dolphins, but that was a game that they were pretty damn close to covering or winning, anyway. So I'm with you here on the Chargers. Obviously the Cowboys got kicked in the teeth last week. I think that's one that might linger a little bit because there are obviously some holes to the Cowboys where, that aren't going to be reflected in games against the Jets and the Giants and oddly enough, were reflected against the Cardinals. And so this is a tough game for the Cowboys, even though it's not necessarily a road game per se, as they just played in California last week. Obviously that didn't go great. They have their training camp in California. I don't know if they travel back to Dallas. Not that Dallas to LA is a particularly difficult flight. But I don't think we're going to see +3 in this game. So for me, this is like, grab the Chargers either, +2, maybe the money line is probably the better play. But again, Chargers games get so weird as far as like guys just missing extra points and stuff where maybe
Staley doing Staley stuff.
Staley going for 2 in weird spots. He might do the thing where he goes for 2 after the first touchdown and all of a sudden the game's 8-0. And you're like, well, I might as well have grabbed that +2. That might come in handy. So let's take the +2 there. The line isn't necessarily out of whack. It's just more that off of a bye, which, by the way, will give them an extra, couple of days to implement Quentin Johnston into the Mike Williams role offensively, where you're sort of, it's way less of a downgrade on their offense with Mike Williams being out when you've already pre-drafted a guy who might not necessarily come right in and play well or have a big role, but after a bye week can have that role where, maybe they don't necessarily miss a beat, especially with the Cowboys missing Trayvon Diggs.
Yeah, that's a great Monday night game. I feel like you have two just entertaining, fun teams where craziness should ensue for sure, which will be a lot of fun for a Monday night. But before we get to Monday night, where can the people find you online to get just more of the information and education we so crave before kickoff?
Yeah, at mrusauthentic on Twitter is theoretically where I'll retweet everything that gets tweeted out that I write over at The Score. But if you want to just go straight to The Score every day, a couple articles a day, essentially Monday through Friday. Saturday, we have our player props article as well. So writing 10 to 11 articles a week over at The Score in the betting section there, in the betting news section. So throw on bet mode and get involved over there. And obviously on Twitter, as I mentioned.
And you can find me on Twitter at Shell Alexander and on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Thank you, of course, for liking and subscribing to the pod wherever you get your podcasts. As I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.